This video will cover how you can get this incredible Rivers of Blood build. This build has got style and can absolutely destroy bosses. This video will also cover any spells, talismans, and armor sets and tips and tricks to squeeze out the absolute maximum potential of this build. And at the end of this video, you'll have one of the strongest bleed builds in the entire game, reminiscent of the raw builds when the game first came out. This Rivers of Blood build will carry you through the endgame or even the DLC with absolutely no problem, especially with the talisman combination we've got going. With this weapon, your primary attack will be your skill, Corpse Piler. Corpse Piler has extremely long range and does bleed and fire damage. This weapon mainly scales on Dex and Arcane. The interesting thing about the scaling on this weapon is, even though Arcane is scaled on D, you'll still come out ahead on damage, and as a bonus, Arcane will increase your blood loss buildup, which means you'll bleed enemies even faster. As for the talismans we'll be using for this build, you can use either Millicent's prosthesis or the Rotten Winged Sword insignia to increase the damage you deal with consecutive attacks. We're also going to use the Lord of Blood's Exaltation for even more damage when bleed procs, since it will increase your attack power by 20% every time blood loss is triggered. You can also use the Shard of Alexander to increase the damage of Corpse Piler by 15%. And finally, for the time being, we're going to use the Carrion Filigreed Crest to preserve your FP better, since you'll be spamming Corpse Piler all the time. We can also use the Sacrificial Axe in our offhand to gain some FP back every time we kill some enemies. Considering that you should be going with Corpse Piler as much as you can over your light or heavy attacks, the Sacrificial Axe will give us 4 FP with every kill we get. So this is going to help give you your FP back, which will allow you to use this ability much more frequently. We're going to switch this out to something better as we upgrade this build. Now, for the armor. We have a few options between style and function, or a mix of both. Of course, you can stick with the default samurai armor set if you like the look of it. Or we could use the Ronin set, which I personally like the look of. You can also use the Okina mask, which increases your dex by +3, or the white mask, which will increase your attack power by 10% for 20 seconds if something around you suffers from blood loss. And considering this will happen all the time, this is a significant buff to our build. What makes this build so great is this old man. And yeah, we're going to need to steal his clothes. Ansbach's set has the unique ability of boosting the power of blood-based skills by 14%. Which is a huge buff for us. Plus his clothes does have some fashion to it. You might have realized by now that getting Ansbach's set basically means you have to have completed the DLC, since you'd get his set only after completing his questline. So if we end up entering a New Game Plus, we also have the opportunity to get and use both the Rotten Winged Sword insignia and Millicent's prosthesis, and use both talismans together. At that point, we'd have the perfect combination of talismans for this build. Another amazing strategy you can use with this build is using the Seppuku Ash of War in order to activate the Lord of Blood's Exaltation and White Mask buffs. Although I understand spamming buffs is annoying, which is why we're mostly going to depend on the passive effects of our talismans and armor. Moving on to the stats for this build. Considering this is an endgame, level 150 build, the 50 Vigor is mainly because we'll be playing a hyper-aggressive playstyle, which means we'll also probably take in a few hits. Being able to stay alive and be able to proc bleed on bosses and enemies is important, considering the weapon doesn't really break poise all that much, but we'll be able to stun enemies whenever the enemies bleed. 30 Mind ensures a good FP pool for using Corpse Piler frequently. Without enough FP you'll struggle and might need to consume your FP potions, which is not ideal. 18 Endurance gives more stamina and some equip load. Stamina is an issue with this build. You'll carry a weapon in the offhand and probably a seal, so some equip load is necessary. Medium to light armor with points in endurance helps with this. Strength is not really required for this build, so it sits at 12. And between Arcane and Dexterity, 48 Dexterity boosts Corpse Piler's damage and weapon damage. Damage increases start being negligible around this point, so both Arcane and Dexterity are at similar levels. Arcane might outweigh Dexterity slightly, so prioritize Arcane. It also helps with increasing the blood loss buildup, which is why 50 Arcane is a sweet spot for damage, spells, or weapon attacks, making it a solid choice for this build. Now check out this next video where I show 7 more samurai themed builds. I'll see you guys there.